Hi, everybody. This is Allison Whitmire with Learning in Action, and I'm super excited to be with you today to talk about analytic network coaching and developing eco-leadership with my special guest, Dr. Simon Western, who I'll give a proper introduction to just a moment. I'd like you to meet my amazing and supportive and incredibly resourceful team. Chris Hardy, and she's the person who makes all these podnars happen from beginning to end. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Allison. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Chris is going to be moderating, as she always does, sometimes behind the scenes and sometimes popping in to find out, to let us know what you all are talking about. And Corey, Director of Training. Thank you, Corey.
Hi, everyone.
Corey's also going to be behind the scenes. She's going to be attending to questions you have to the extent she's able to address them. If you have technology issues, you're not sure. I see a raised hand by William. That's always cool. So we're here to attend to you, and I'm so excited that you're here. So thank you, team. We'll be back to you in a bit. And if you've never attended our podcasts, pretty much, and if you are, that's okay, because we made it up. We call it a cross between a podcast and a webinar. It's interview style, so it's not so formal, not so presentation oriented, like a podcast, and it's interactive with your audience, like a webinar. And that's what makes it great, at least we think. And you might be asking, why does Learning in Action do these podnars? It's because we genuinely want to support you, our community of people who work with leaders, who work with as catalysts throughout the world, doing what you do to help people and organizations be their best. And we want to create content experiences that inspire and inform you. That's why we do what we do. And we'd love for you to interact with us. If you'd like to chat, you just want to say, hey, from wherever you are in the world, you want to engage with the rest of the people in the today, that clicking on the chat button. And if you want all the attendees and not just us panelists to see it, you'll want to make sure you change the little arrow right here to see all panelists and attendees. Then everyone can see what you have to say. If you have a question for Simon or I, you can put that in the Q&A box. You'll find that if you move your cursor around, you'll see a little box that says Q&A in it. And if you can put your questions there, we'll see them really clearly and cleanly and out of the filter of the chat. And from time to time, we'll be doing polls for you. And what you do to participate in the poll is you just see the poll and click the answer that best fits your response. And so we're going to launch a poll right now. Chris, let's put that poll up. And the poll is, as you can see, how familiar are you with eco-leadership? So you will just go ahead and read that, and I am going to happily introduce my guest, Simon Western. Simon, I'm so happy for you to be here. My guest is Dr. Simon Western. He's the author of many books and blogs. We'll name all those books at the end of our podnar today. He's the president of the International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organizations. So proud of myself, I got that. He's an adjunct professor for the University College of Dublin, and he's the creator and founder and chief executive of the Analytic-Network Coaching, and he has this really rich myriad background as being a factory worker, a general and psychiatric nurse, a family therapist, manager, academic. It's got all these different, one of the things I so appreciate about that background is this rich and textured background that really informs so much. So, Simon, welcome. So glad you're here.
Good to be with you, Alison, and everybody. How are you all?
Really good, really good. So if you can start by maybe telling us a little bit about how you came to this work and perhaps how your background informs it.
Yeah, so my background is, I've had a long journey. I got thrown out of school when I was 16 years old. I ended up working in a factory. I got encouraged by friends to go into nursing. They said I'd be good working with people. So I went on this journey through general nursing, psychiatric nursing, into psychotherapy, family therapy. And whilst I was engaged with the kind of the clinical work, which I loved, I was also looking at the bigger systems and the organizations and getting pretty frustrated, to be honest, about why the health system didn't perform better, why the leadership was not as good as it could be. I met some good leaders on the way, but I also met some very troublesome kind of organizational dynamic. And I got fascinated by it and study it. And I decided to study it from a position of the unconscious, because it seemed to me that reading the management books, we had a lot of the rational answers. We kind of knew how to do this stuff, but for some reason we weren't doing it. So I started to study the unconscious using psychoanalytic thinking about how organizational dynamics work, and that kind of got me into coaching. I became the coaching director of Lancaster University Management School. I did a PhD studying leadership in a management school, and really started to try and understand kind of how organizations work, how we could improve them. So it was my kind of determination to try and kind of make these things better, get past the frustrations.
Yeah, and Lord knows there's a lot of frustrations in organizations. So let's look at our results from the poll. Looks like 57% of the audience isn't familiar with eco-leadership at all. Okay. 17% barely, so 20% somewhat. We've got a great newbie audience for this. So my understanding is one of the constructs around this idea of eco-leadership is that the models of leadership for the last 100 years have changed dramatically. Can you share more about that? And then I'm going to pull up a slide to kind of anchor your points here.
Yeah, so my PhD and postdoctoral research was really to try and understand leadership. And I read leadership theory over the last 100 years and really started to think about how this could be categorized. And the 4 categories I came up with were what I call discourses of leadership. And the first category, and I'm going to race through these, there's a lot of depth to these, so you'll need to kind of buy these books and kind of read them to get any depth to it. But very briefly, controller leadership was kind of born in the Industrial Revolution, where the leadership of industry and manufacturing, people really thought that the way to improve this was applying kind of efficiency and productivity. So it was really about kind of Fordism and Taylorism and how kind of management control could improve efficiency. So we divided up the labor and we kind of got to mass production. We got production lines, and it was incredibly successful. I mean, make no mistake, this was an incredibly successful kind of thing. It transformed society. We got mass consumption, mass production, living standards got raised. And at the same time, it was critiqued because it was there was some anti-humanism in it. People were treated like cogs in the wheel of the machine. And controller leadership kind of stays with us. If you see the curve on this chart, it started to demise. It stays with us. It's an important part of what we do. We do want efficient organizations. We do want to control resources, but we don't want to be dehumanizing. Around the year 2000, it starts to rise again. And this is where we kind of algorithmic management. We got kind of people are being thrust upon them targets all the time. We have targets, goals. We're controlled by kind of the machine. We're measured by the machine. We're answerable to kind of data all the time. So controller leadership has come back in a new way. It used to be the supervisor looking over your shoulder. Now it's the technology measuring you all the time. So that's the controller discourse. And like I say, that it's good and it's useful. We need that in balance. In the post-war years, people kind of wanted a more democratic society. They wanted kind of a more humane way of working in the offices and the factories. And the therapist discourse kind of majored there. So this is really about relationships and motivation. And you've got psychologists coming into the workplace. You've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got human resources and personnel departments coming for the first time. And there's a shift from trying to control the workforce to motivate the workforce. So these are kind of shifting kind of how people thought about how to motivate workers, and business schools taught therapist leadership as a major kind of force alongside some controller leadership. That was very successful during the 20th century. until around 1980, when there was a big slump in the economy in the USA and in the West, and the USA looked over its shoulder, and the Asian tiger economies were winning the game. So Toyota was outperforming Ford, and people started to study the Japanese way of doing things, the Asian way of doing things, and they realized that collective cultures were kind of very important. So the individualistic culture, the therapist leader who motivated individuals and teams, wasn't actually kind of being as productive as these collective cultures where they work with Kaizen and they work with quality circles to improve productivity throughout the whole organization. So in the US, the business schools started to come up with transformational leadership, which is called leadership. So you get a charismatic leader who tries to create this strong collective culture in the organization. And a lot of the language in organizational behavior, organizations started to shift into culture. How do we kind of improve the culture? How do we get a strong culture? And it meant that people kind of were loyal to the leader, loyal to the vision. So you got a charismatic leader, a Steve Jobs character, set out a very strong and powerful vision, and then the workforce works very hard. They don't need to be supervised or coerced or motivated. They work because they had faith in the leader and faith in the leader's vision. So that was the 20th century. At the turn of the 20th century, we had the digitalization of society, we had the IT revolution, we had hyper-globalization, and we had kind of environmental changes. And the prefix eco starts to come up in the business world a lot, because people realize that they're shifting from a machine metaphor, which was a controller, therapist, messiah, closed, how to make it more productive, into thinking that organizations are ecosystems within ecosystems. Organizations are connected to the wider society, to political change, to economic change, to environmental change. And inside organizations, we have to break down silos. We have to kind of really think about how we manage our organizations as if they are ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So I've raced through a bit, but that's kind of a quick review of the four discourses of leadership over the last century.
Mm-hmm. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that none of those prior methods of leadership were necessarily like wrong, and I'm not hearing you saying a right, wrong. They're just not enough individually.
That's right. They're all necessary, and they're all still there. They're still present. They're still necessary. You need great therapist leaders and managers. You need good people managers in organizations. You need people controlling resources and product vision, and you need strong cultures. If one dominates too much, you have a problem. So if you get a therapist leader, you can get a great people organization, but they take their eye off the ball on efficiency and they don't work with a vision, they become kind of inward focused. If you just have kind of controller leadership, it becomes dehumanizing. So it's about balancing these, and the eco leadership is a kind of a meta leadership which tries to balance these other three and looks at a wider ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about your use of the word discourse here. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, discourse in academic language, what it is it's like taken for granted notions. We call them norms. So these norms, so the controller discourse was the norm during the early 19th century. That's what people expected in factories. Nobody questioned it. That was the norm. Therapist leadership became the dominant norm. Style became the norm period. So they're like taken for granted norms. We don't kind of think in these terms, but when we talk about leadership, we think about Messiah leadership. And it's very interesting if kind of the listeners can think about their own organizations and their own work, how people talk about leadership and what are they talking about? Are they talking about Messiah? Are they talking about kind of therapists? Are they talking about kind of management control? What are they talking about on the scales? And it helps us. This is not a definitive description of leadership. It's a way to help us discuss leadership. It's a way to help us kind of how we think about leadership.
Got it. And so what I understand is that each of these styles of leadership or discourses of leadership align with a certain kind of organizational structure. Can you speak to that? Yeah,
so this slide you've put up kind of shows this. So the controller leadership traditionally is the hierarchy. Board, and we have the triangle. Therapist leadership is very much about a leader in a small team. So it's about relationships and about people, and it's about kind of the leadership and the team around them. It doesn't really go beyond into kind of the whole organization. So you get great therapist leaders, but they don't really think strategically across the whole. And this is where you can get some silos forming. Messiah leadership is like man and woman on a wire. So you get a leader with a very strong message, and you can get rid of these layers of management, supervisors and stuff, and you have a flat hierarchy because it's all about culture control. I work for this company because I believe in the vision, and I'm self-motivated, and it's all about peer surveillance. People who kind of watch each other, see who leaves early from work, see who's not working hard, see who's not being loyal to the leadership. So you don't need a big structure. You have a flat structure with a charismatic leader at the top. And the eco-leadership, as you can see, is a network where you try and distribute leadership everywhere. You want leadership at the edges, at the center, at the top. You have a network of leadership. Leadership becomes a distributed phenomena. It's not just kind of the top kind of board. It's right throughout the whole organization. And that makes it very, very different.
Mm-hmm. Are there companies that you could name or feel comfortable naming that would give us a name to some of these organizational forms?
In the book, I write case studies. Rather than give a company, it's maybe worth thinking about. So, controller leadership is your classical bureaucratic office or your factory, and these days it's also kind of some kind of high tech companies as well. So, Messiah leadership is often the kind of it's where you get a strong leadership at the top, and you get kind of people working fluidly within. So companies like Apple kind of structure themselves in this way. So you get kind of a strong leadership message, and then people find their way in the company, and they work in changing teams, fluid teams. Therapist leadership is very often found in education, in hospitals, in public sector places where people really value kind of people skills and stuff. So they organize the organization around that kind of model. And eco-leadership is found in avant-garde organizations at the moment. We have two types of eco-leadership. In the latest edition of the book, we have two types. We have an ethical leadership, and we have a commercial eco-leadership. So if you look at Amazon will be a commercial eco-leadership. They understand ecosystems better than anybody else in the retail sector, in the cloud. They know kind of platforms to sell things to, and they're hugely successful. And then you have people who use the same way of thinking internally in the organization to create ethical organizations, which are very, very dynamic. And they try and unleash leadership everywhere across the whole organization. So Unilever takes a very ethical stance on leadership. So they think about how they organize themselves within the company, and they think about how their impact on the environment, on taking social responsibility for others. So eco-leadership goes beyond the company boundary.
Okay, so I just like it almost. What I'm trying to grapple with is like it's not like ethical or commercial leadership is not ethical, and that ethical leadership can't be commercial. And the way I think I'm hearing you say it is ethical leadership might be more outward focused about what we do in the world society system, and maybe commercial is more about not that it leans more toward, well, this is a for-profit entity and we've got to make money at the end of the day, and at the end of the day it's about the gain of the company. Or I'm just trying to figure out how I put those two together, ethical and commercial.
So those two things have been separated in the past, and what I'm trying to do with eco-leadership is bring them together, because actually if you take an ethical stance about leadership and it drives your purpose and your meaning, you want to empower your own workforce as well as kind of do good in society. And to empower your own workforce, you want to make sure that leadership can flourish throughout the whole organization. You want people to kind of stand up and be leaders. You want them to kind of fulfill their potential, not just to be followers, to be dependent. You want them to kind of fulfill their potential So you work in this way anyway. Eco-leadership kind of works inside and outside the organization. So the model of eco-leadership I work with this is ethical and it's commercially viable.
The intersection.
It drives success.
Right. That feels right. So can you talk to us about the qualities of eco-leadership?
Yeah, so there's 4 core qualities. When I kind of analyzed it, when we talk about systems thinking and complexity and all these kind of buzzwords, we often kind of miss out the humanity. So connectivity and interdependence are the basis of eco-leadership. We're all connected to the environment, to each other, global business. We have to think about partnerships and collaborations. Things have radically changed, and we have to kind of be more connected and realize our interdependence is really kind of something we can't escape. We have to kind of address that. Leadership spirit is about the kind of human spirit in all this. Let's never forget the human spirit. Let's never forget our human potential. Let's never forget kind of trying to make our human and make society human. Systemic ethics is taking ethics one step further than saying let's just do good in the workplace. I'm not a bad person. Systemic ethics is about how does my downstream employees, how do my employees in China, in Bangladesh, how does kind of the waste products of my company affect the environment? How are we treating kind of the wider system? How do our ethics of how we're working in this factory or in this production plant or this technical building, how do we kind of account for the wider system? So Apple makes phones in China. They had a lot of problems a few years ago of people jumping out of buildings and stuff. That's systemic ethics. It's saying it's no good selling iPhones and saying we're a great company if there's people really suffering at the other end of the line. So it's about taking a systemic kind of position and saying, we need to kind of account for our engagement with people and with the environment, as well as in our own business dealings. And organizational belonging, try and bring organizations back into local and global communities, because for a while they escaped. They were paying their taxes offshore. They were not kind of feeding back into local communities, and globally they were kind of just sat in their own little worlds doing their stuff, getting huge kind of profits, the successful ones, and not giving enough back. And this is not just about giving back. There's actually a joy to this. So if you're running a company and you're isolated offshore and you're not really engaged, you don't get that sense of belonging. Your workers don't get that sense of belonging either. So it's about bringing organizations back so that they actually engage with their local communities where they are, where they're situated, and virtually with their kind of clients or customers, the wider society, so they actually start belonging to society again. And you can see that there's been quite a shift. You can see this move in organizations. It's quite exciting that people are really taking this on board at the moment.
That's super exciting. So I can see, is it the quality of leadership? I can see how ethical and commercial interests can work together.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions from our audience. Linda Sabot, sorry if I'm butchering your name, Linda, is asking a question. She's saying she works almost completely with the U.S. government. Can eco-leadership be used, can you imagine it being used in the military or in a government setting?
Yeah, I've done some work with people in the military, and it's a good example. The military kind of for a long time were based on command and control, and you obey your orders and you follow. When they go out to Afghanistan and places like Syria, modern warfare needs a very agile approach. You want people who can kind of think on their feet, who can be adaptive, who can relate to kind of the locals, who can. So you need leaders everywhere in the military. Shift, understanding that whilst you need some command and control, some clear vision and things, you also need this leadership where people are kind of working and taking up leadership at the edges, in a much more fluid way than they used to. And in the public sector, the same. We have to be more agile in our health systems, in our public systems. These are very complex ecosystems, and they need eco-leadership approaches, but quite often they're a long way from it.
Yes, yeah. And so, Linda, if you want to check out the book Team of Teams, can't remember the author right now, but that is all about like what the lessons learned from the military in Afghanistan, Iraq, and like how the forces there learned that they had to be more nimble. If they waited for a top-down approach, they were all gonna, like, it wasn't gonna work. So anyway, that's a good one. Any other resources that you suggest other than your research books around this, so they could get their head around this?
There's lots of Margaret Wheatley started kind of talking about this many years ago, and started opening up. Often the resources get they get put into kind of ethical or utopian thinking. What my work tries to do is try to bring this into kind of real time. So you get Frederick Laloux's book on organizations. That's another kind of reimagining organizations. He gives some good examples of eco leadership, but it's around a kind of a bit of a utopian idea where you just flatten the hierarchy and everything kind of works. He gives some good examples of organizations which do work, but actually it's a lot more tricky than that, and it takes kind of a lot of resilience and a lot of thinking to kind of make this work.
Mm-hmm. So Lisa Orlick has a question that says, are there examples of eco-leadership where there are not charismatic, I guess not organically imprinted all over the culture, and allow the workforce to break away from the mothership?
Yeah, so a lot of my studies from it comes from social movements. Society changes usually through social movements, through grassroots movements. You know, so if you think about kind of the right to vote for women or civil rights, these are grassroots social movements. So I studied social movements in current times, the Occupy movement, the Arab Spring. I did a paper on the Arab Spring movement. And these are movements where it's hard to even name where the leaders are, because they're bubbling up and they're disappearing. They're popping up on the internet, and they're sharing information. They take leadership and they withdraw from leadership. I call this autonomous leadership. It's kind of where everybody can take up leadership depending on their skills and their energy and stuff, you know. And we're trying to kind of you see that in the organization. A lot of exactly like that. Even for kind of the command and control, where we think leadership is, but actually leadership's often done by the quiet woman who's kind of getting stuff done on the side, or the quiet man in the corner who kind of gets stuff done. So we often have a lot of invisible leaders who are acting in this way, and eco-leadership is very much about kind of harnessing that invisible, hidden leadership.
Yeah, I wonder, like, you know, what's coming up for me, and this may be really crazy. I'm like, have you studied kind of like really like when it comes out, this is going to sound terrible, but it sounds like I'm like, it seems like mafia is kind of structured this way, which is like obviously totally unethical, but like are there some like informal leadership structures that get this righter than the really formal ones, or at least aspects of this?
Well, I mean, if you look at radical groups, radical religious groups, radical kind of terror, Al-Qaeda, they organize in a viral way. They organize in this viral way.
That's what was coming up for me. Is that so there's something more about it.
Yeah, so you know, eco-leadership is not necessarily just for good. You know, this can be used for kind of evil as well. So, but you know, they're an example of, like, you know, they don't want to get kind of they put all their leaders in one place because they're going to get kind of busted. So they get this viral approach to leadership, and it's very hard for kind of conventional military. This is why the military has to change its way of working. To fight modern warfare, you have to kind of echo this kind of way of working. So social movements are very good examples, you know, for good or for bad, how kind of leadership flourishes at the edges, how it kind of grows, and how it can bubble up through. And it's about harnessing that for the good. It's about harnessing that for kind of for the company you work for the society we live in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Melanie Cossett's asking a question. When working in a hierarchical system that's encouraging leadership at every level, but have time using it across the organization, what do you suggest?
That's my life.
Yeah, I bet that's right.
My life's work is working in these organizations. So it's really about kind of small understanding. The nice thing about eco leadership is that if you get a lot of people very disillusioned and say that, you know, the people at the top, they'll never change and we can't change anything. And the nice thing about eco-leadership is you look for nodes and for clusters, and you start telling people that small changes lead to bigger changes. This viral change can take place. You look for kind of connecting people who've got some energy, you put them together, and you start working in parallel to these subverting these kind of hierarchical dominating kind of structures. So you don't have to try and kind of change a big structure. You can get these pop-up groups, you can get this fluidity, and it's a very, very nice way of working it. When I worked in hospitals and health systems in particular, it really liberates people. They feel, yeah, we can do something. We're not just going to learn about bosses, in our own little group. We'll change patient care here, and then that idea will spread throughout your hospital.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you saying is like the idea of trying to take change a top-down organization from the top down might not be the way to go. It's like create these little groups whose performance proves that. I mean, like all eyes will go to them when so they're doing something amazing.
That's right, and I usually try and work at both. I don't ignore the top. I try and get some resources for these small groups to do some stuff. I try and get them to change their mindset to allow this to start happening. They're not going to suddenly change to a kind of eco-leadership thing. This is the process, and to be honest, we're all learning how to do it. None of us really know how to do it. I'm kind of like a leading kind of a theorist on this and practitioner, but I'm still learning. I learn from every organization I go in. I'm kind of learning how to do this along with everyone else. This is what we've got to do in politics, in our society, public sector organizations.
Cool. We've got one more question. Actually, from the audience. Let me go to one of the questions that was asked in advance. So Sandra Harris asked the question, how is eco-leadership transformational in terms of leadership development?
Yeah, okay, so when I'm working with HR and L&D people, O&D people, I talk about that they're trapped in an ideology, and the ideology is individual behaviorism. So what they do when they think about leadership is, how can we change the individual? How can we change their behaviors? And they're caught up in that kind of way of thinking. That's kind of, they get trapped in that way of thinking. That's what they've been trained to do, basically. Eco-leadership says, don't think about that so much. I mean, individuals are important, but think about networks. Think about creating spaces for leadership to flourish. Think about where you can build networks. So I think a leadership development piece of work I do is a leadership exchange, where we take groups of leaders, we train them into how to observe, how to give feedback, how to kind of be reflective. And then we match them up across the organization. So we'll get a finance officer working with a salesperson. We'll get kind of a chief executive working with someone in the retail sector. And they'll observe each other. They'll visit each other reciprocally. They'll observe each other. They'll have this exchange, and they give each other feedback on tips, what they've learned. And what you're doing there is you're doing individual development, and you're doing network and eco-leadership development. You're creating networks across the organization. You're breaking down silos. You're building real relationships. And people come back and they say, this is the most important piece of learning they've done in years, because they actually got feedback on how they were as leaders. They got tips from watching other teams work. So that's the sort of thing we do. Build networks and organizations. That's the idea of leaders and training them how to behave differently.
Great. Well, let's go to Chris and hear what the audience is chatting about.
Lots of great comments. And Melanie again has another follow-up question. She says she's curious as to how you encourage folks who are personally limited by their own mindset about leadership. They have deferred to others their entire lives and were taught to respect authority. So the organization is encouraging distributed leadership, but the people inside the organization are running up against themselves in trying to deliver it.
Yeah, it's hard work. It's hard work. And the reality is that the nice thing about eco-leadership is that we're not trying to impose one way of doing it to everybody. So some people are just good controller leaders, and you try and find a position where controller leadership works for them. Some people are just therapists, and they do that really well. And you try and work with people who have eco-leadership capability, who can change that mindset. Because if you spend your time just really trying to change everybody to these kind of eco-leaders, it's not going to happen. And we need the other forms of leadership. So it's getting the balance right. Some people won't change. Some people kind of need some encouragement, support, and creative environment so they can change. We have loads of creative exercises and developmental exercises that we do. I take people to art galleries. I take them outside their normal habitats. I take them into nature. I do kind of lots of really interesting and dynamic things with people to try and sort of break up traditional mindsets and see things differently. But some people kind of are very attached to a way of being, and it's about accepting that and working with smaller groups who are kind of going to be progressive and lead change in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that helps.
Mm-hmm. What else, Chris?
We have another question from Adam Kierick. He says, are there any good examples or bad examples of how to leadership in stress environments? His context is UK Health Services, where there's a lot of anxiety at all levels of the organization.
Yeah, could you repeat the question? So it's about eco-leadership in health systems, and what was his point?
He's looking for either good or bad examples of how distributed leadership can occur in high-stress environments where there's a lot of anxiety at all levels.
So I worked for 3-4 years in a hospice. It was a pretty high-stress environment, working with dying all the time, a lot of emotion, a lot of stress. And we worked there to turn the hospice inside out. That hospice was winning prizes for being the best hospice
Wow.
only working with like 15 to 20 patients. And we were thinking, what about all the other people outside the hospice who are dying in their homes and in other hospitals? How can we reach them? So we hospice out. We got a lot to work more in the community. We got, I think it was 500 hospice neighbours, volunteers, who would knock on doors of the dying, and they'd run errands for them. They'd walk the dog for them. They'd be companions for them. So it's about kind of really reimagining what you can do in these places. And again, starting off with a small kind of example of what works. So we did one small little example that worked, and we built on that. Small changes lead to bigger changes. When people see change, then it changes their anxiety and they start engaging. So it's really about kind of small changes, create bigger changes, find a few people who've got the energy, create something, make it happen, and then that will already start to spread.
That's beautiful. Anything in the chat we should attend to, Chris, before we move on?
You know, there is one comment here from Leslie Goldenberg, and she says, maybe Zappos is a good business example of eco-leadership.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of companies like that now popping up, kind of doing this kind of in quite a radical way and being quite successful with it. So yeah, it's a great example.
Super. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so transitioning into the next piece. So we've established leadership is changing. Leadership, ideally, we want to look toward eco-leadership, which requires a distributed form of leadership. So what does all this mean in terms of how we, people who work with or coach leaders, need to change to now reflect the changing nature of leadership really across the world?
So this is my experience. I wrote these theories of eco-leadership, and I've been to different. I do keynotes in kind of the banking sector, in the retail sector, in the engineering sector, health sector. It was great. We really get this idea. We know we're working with these kind of challenges you're describing. How do we do it? So this is why I formed Analytic-Network Coaching, and I designed a kind of training methodology which really addresses this question. So should we go on to those slides?
Yeah, let's do that.
So this slide shows you how eco-leadership is a meta leadership, and the other leadership forms within the organization remain there. They don't disappear.
Okay.
Let's go on to the network slide. Yeah. So this is my company, and we started probably 5 years ago now, and we began with an ethical purpose: coaching leaders to act in good faith to create a good society. And this, I think, is really important. It's really important to understand that leadership is a basically means getting leaders to work in the best way they can, with clear purpose, to really create the good society. That's big questions like climate change and being socially responsible. It does mean that as well, but it also means creating a good society in every workplace, in every meeting you go to. It means getting people to really work to the best of their ability collectively. So whenever I start a meeting or training, I said, we have a choice. Are we going to kind of have a meeting full of where we're going to moan, where we're going to be disruptive, where we're not going to help each other, or are we going to create a good society here? Are we going to create a meeting where we can work together in the here and now? So it's very much about kind of that way of thinking, about acting in good faith to create a good society at a local and at a global level. That's our ethos.
Mm-hmm.
What I found was that people needed a framework to work on. So it really made me think about the work I've been doing over the last 20 years, really. And at Lancaster University, when I was director of coaching, I'd started to kind of work on this. And then I started to kind of work on in order to move from the individual to the whole system, to the network, to the ecosystem. You can't just jump into the ecosystem. One of the mistakes of management theory around systems and complexity is that people kind of just go straight for that. And they start doing diagrams and loops of communication, and they miss the individual. So I start with the individual. And the first piece of work we do is a depth analysis. So coaches need to start to think about how the individual links to the kind of the team, links to kind of the diverse leadership methodologies we work with, and then how we work with the networks and the ecosystems. And we need to give people a way into this. The way in for us is we start with a depth analysis, and it's really about working on the inner self. Who you are, what your purpose is, some of your blind spots, some of your blocks, what makes you happy, what you struggle with. And people have a approach from a workplace level. And they really start gaining some insights into kind of what their motivation is. One of my favorite questions as a coach is I ask people when I first meet them, what is your desire? And it kind of confuses people. They say, what do you mean? And I repeat the question, what is your desire? And people start really thinking quite deeply about, good question, what is my desire? What do I really want? What do I want out of my life? What do I want for myself? What do I want for my family? What do I want for my workplace? And we start to explore that in some real depth. And then some of the blocks which get in the way. We then move on to relational analysis. Once we kind of clarify some of the blocks and we get some clarity on purpose, we then think about how you relate to others and how others relate to you. We're all shaped by relationships, from our formative relationships as infants, from our mothers, from our families, through to our workplace relationships. So the relational self is really important. How do I relate to others? How do I relate? That you can be a good team player, how you get drawn into certain dynamics with certain people. Your mother-daughter relationship gets played out at work, or your authority relationships get played out in certain ways. So we do some work with individuals on that piece of work, how they relate to others. Then we do a leadership analysis, and people use my questionnaire, which is www.hiddenleadership.com, and it goes through those discourses. It gives you a map as to kind of where you are on those discourses. And it's not saying you're one or the other. We all have all of those within us. Are you more therapist leader, eco leader, messiah leader, control leader? Where are you now? Where would you like to be? For you to progress in your career, for you to progress in your personal life, for you to fulfill your purpose, where would you like to be on that map? How can you become more of an eco leader? How can you become more of a therapist leader? Whatever you need to kind of develop in yourself. And we coach through the process. And we start doing work mapping. We get people to put themselves inside on a great big piece of paper, a flip chart piece of paper with pens, and we have a model I use. We have some technology we use where we can map power, relationships, creativity, conflict, how we relate to our networks. And it can be not just individuals, it can be departments. So if you're working in a bank, it can be kind of the finance department, the sales department, the chief executive's office. You might not even know these people, but you have a relationship in the network to them. Because of the way of their regulations, how that impacts on my work, it kind of creates a block in me. So we start mapping the whole network. And it's a fascinating exercise. It's an unusual exercise because we talk about power, we talk about conflict, we talk about emotions there, as well as a normal kind of stakeholder analysis stuff. We go beyond that, and people are really blown away by it.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to see spaces on that network, who they should connect with to make changes, who should be connected on that network to kind of be able to get a small cluster of people where change can start to take place. And we ask these questions: where on that network is there informal leadership? Where in that network can kind of a cluster of people get together to really create the change we need to make a start? And people get really liberated and engaged in it, and it's very, very powerful. And then the last analysis is to look back on those 4 frames and say, let's get a strategy for yourself and a strategy for your workplace. So people get a personal development strategy. I need to kind of develop in this way. I need to do this work. This is what I'm going to do next. And they get a kind of a workplace strategy. And those frames take you from the individual to the team to the kind of lead model to the kind of changing. And it allows people to kind of develop this kind of notion of eco-leadership and how they approach it.
Mm-hmm. So when you're doing an engagement using this methodology, like who's your client, and like how many people do you in an organization do you do this? Yeah, can you just give me a sense of what an engagement might look like?
Yeah, so I do open training. So I just come back from Australia. We had 30 people sign up for an open training there. And that will be a mixture of, there'll be, say, 40, 50% individual coaches. There'll be a few consultants. There'll be a couple of professors who turn up. They like my work. And then you'll get people in-house. You'll get a few HR people. You'll get a few managers who are really interested in these ideas. So we'll get kind of a spectrum when we do open house trainings like that. It's majority of coaches and people in-house. And then then I go into companies and I work with, I do a lot of work with global OD departments. So leadership and development and organizational development departments, they bring me in. So I've been working with I've been working with Microsoft in Seattle there and other big organizations in the banking sector in the UK, and the health sector, the NHS. They take me in at kind of quite a senior level. And I start sharing these ideas, and we start to think about how we take people through these kind of this workshop methodology. Then we think about how we can tailor it and deliver it in their wider organization.
So when an organization engages with you, like, what are they saying they want? Like, what's the problem they're having, or why do they say, like we really need someone here to teach us eco-leadership?
Yeah, so they've usually someone's who read some of my work, come across work, and the notion of eco-leadership is important. And they come to me and they say, look, we've been successful over the last 50 years, but we're really struggling. We've really got to learn how to kind of change from this top-down management style to really think about how we work with our partners more, with our stakeholders more. Our customers are kind of demanding much more of us. They want personalization. How do we personalize, whether it's healthcare or whether it's kind of selling cars? Everybody wants a personalization kind of model. How do we create platforms to deliver this? How do we do this thing? And we want to be more ethical, and we want to. We know that if we're more ethical, we'll retain our staff and we recruit better. We know these. How do we do it, Simon? We know we've grown up in this way of working, this kind of machine metaphor way of working, and now we need to deal with these ecosystems we live in. We know we live in them. They're complex and difficult. Can you help us with this?
That's fascinating. So, would you slower, or maybe just how these things relate to each other, because you've identified them individually?
So the different parts, now I go through these frames, but really they're all connected. They kind of blur into each other. If I'm doing a coaching session or working with some senior leaders, We often start with a depth analysis in the center. We work to the relational, the leadership analysis, the network analysis, and then we develop strategy. And it's always about, for me, it's always about, there's no personal development without organizational development. I never kind of think about, okay, we just work with the individual or we do the organization stuff. It's always both. If I'm doing OD stuff, I'm always thinking about individuals. If I'm doing individual stuff, I'm always thinking about OD. And this is how we work. So we work through this kind of framework. It gives us, what it does, it gives us a way of working, and it also gives, we pass it on to our client group. They internalize this, and they can see kind of, when they're doing some work, look guys, we're focusing far too much on the depth analysis, too much on the network, or we're just in the network and we haven't done anything on the leadership. It's no good doing the network analysis when everyone's still in control of the leadership mode. We have to do some work there. So it gives them a kind of like an inner supervisor to work with. It gives them a framework to kind of think about how they're doing their own work.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, let's see what questions our audience has. So we've got some audience questions in advance, and this is from Karen Bowden Brown. Is hierarchy necessary in distributed leadership? I guess Zappos would say no in their holacracy, but I'm curious what you would say.
Yeah, I think there's, I think it's getting balanced. If you draw two lines, north, south, kind of east, west, you have hierarchy top down, and you have kind of a lateral, kind of horizontal networks. Usually there's both. Mm-hmm. People often tell a narrative that there's not both, that kind of, we got rid of all that, you know. It's usually there. It's usually there in some way. You know, you still have to answer to some shareholders or somebody. There's always someone to answer for, some regulator, some governance structure. You know, so it's about getting the balance. And some places are you can do a lot more kind of on the lateral, and some places still need quite a bit of vertical. And it's about working between the two.
Yeah, that's my experience too, is that when things get too vertical, people feel like too constrained, too restricted. And when things get too horizontal, people are like, wow, where are the boundaries? You know, so there's some kind of balanced middle path. And
in those examples we would give of social movements or organizations which have kind of really gone very flat, usually they're not that sustainable. And there's usually a hidden kind of dynamic going on beneath the surface. There's usually kind of different ways leadership and authority are taking place within groups. There's no here. That's the message. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's always power being played out. There's always kind of some powerful groups who kind of are maneuvering within these systems. And it's about being open. The more open we can be about it, the better, really. Yeah, yeah. So Angie Pinkon asked the question, and I'm unclear exactly how it fits in this frame, but I'm curious about your answer. What's your distinction between character and behavior? Yeah, maybe she's got that from one of my books. I write a bit about that. So I try and get HR people to break away from the idea of individual behaviorism. So people say we must get behavior change. And for me, that's a bit too technocratic. It's a bit like treating people like kind of robots. If we fix this bit, get your coaching toolbox out, fix this bit, change the behaviors. When I was a psychiatric nurse, I worked with what they call token economy. They get mentally ill patients and they reward them with cigarettes, or they kind of give. It was pretty shameful, really. You know what went on, and can performance rewards for doing this and doing that. But character is different. Character is really about kind of who you are, how you show up, it comes from a deeper level, and that's what I want to work with. I want to work with character. I want to work from the inside out. Yeah. Yeah. When the inside different, the outside changes. Yeah. So a couple of questions about, like, can you give, and we're just in the last few minutes, so just to the extent you can, give us kind of relatively quick examples. An example of a company where you and your group have worked, and kind of what the change you've seen occur, like what was the before state and what was the after state, and how long did that take? Yes, I worked with hospice. I worked with National Education Leadership Centre in the UK. It was chartered changing the whole further education, which and now college sector in the US. And we were charged to develop the leaders throughout the whole thing. And the organization who was developed the charge had its own mindset. It had its own kind of top-down mindset. And so working with about 300 people, we transformed that organization, which was then going to transform the kind of the FE sector, the further education sector. And the way we transformed it was I engaged the whole organization. I engaged them in focus groups, small groups. We created these clusters, these networks, and we got these conversations going. And we inverted the leadership. So every year they'd have an annual meeting, and usually it was the chief executive would create the agenda and lead this meeting. We got the administrative staff to do it. So we empowered the administrative staff, and they were kind of freaked out at first, but they got some support. And after 3 years, this was some kind of thing. They loved it. They loved kind of organizing this, taking lead in it. It was fun. It was dynamic, and the whole thing kind of changed its ethos. There was like a conversation going through the whole organization, and it created this huge kind of dynamic of energy, and that was transferred to the work they were doing. There's like, it's this parallel process. You don't just focus on the big strategy. Transform this group, and then the work they do is going to be kind of informed by that experience.
That sounds really rich.
2 years. I left after 3 years, but over a 3 year period, that kind of was a real big transformation.
So here we're coming to about to come to a close, and I want to make sure people know more about your work here. So first of all, we'd love feedback. Chris is going to put up a poll letting you chime in on how we did today. Chris, if you could go ahead and launch that poll. So if what we talked about today, the various discourses of leadership, eco-leadership, the 5-frame model, you can learn more about that as 3-day advanced coach training. You can find out more about that on his website, Analytic-Network.com. And if you're interested in his trainings that are occurring in this year in Denmark, London, or Seattle, for our mini Seattle Pacific Northwest contingent there, contact Simon. His information is all right here. You can email him directly and find out all about it. Okay. And if you'd like to learn more about Simon's work on eco-leadership, you can find out more in his books. His book, Coaching and Mentoring, A Critical Text, is in its 3rd edition, which that's how you know it's in demand. It's in its 3rd edition, which is great to see. And got these books.
Yeah, it's a correction. The leadership is in its 3rd edition. The coaching is in its 1st edition.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
So the leadership book is going to be out in about 2 weeks. So it's on Amazon. You can buy all these on Amazon. The global leadership book's very interesting, very interesting culture. We have 20 perspectives of leadership across the globe on the global leadership. The coaching is an in-depth theory of coaching and practice, and the leadership book does all the eco-leadership work for you.
Nice. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do at Learning in Action, you can enroll in one of our free Introduction to Relational Intelligence classes. And Chris is going to put a link to that in the chat box, and you can find out more about that. That's on March 22nd. That's 7:30 Pacific, 10:30 Eastern. And then you can see others this week. Go and find more about it at learninginaction.com. We have EQ certification classes, master classes, some things coming up in Seattle. Work with teams, a relatively new team certification. Super excited about that. And if you just want to learn more about Analytic Network Coaching, the work that Simon's doing, here's all of his contact information. You can find out more about all of that by connecting with him and his organization here. If you'd like to connect with me or anyone at Learning in Action, you can do that here. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can email me. You can email us at Learning in Action. Follow us there. And our next Podnar is coming up. We do this monthly. Our April Podnar is on April 26th with Steve Romano. super excited about this. It's going to be on the topic of mindful coaching and what it calls the new MBA, Mastering Being Awareness. Mastering Awareness. I love the idea that we don't have to do all the time. And that's on Friday, April 26th. You'll get a link to sign up for that, Podnar, when you get the recording of this one. So we'll be sending out to you probably today or tomorrow, the recording of this and all the resources that were mentioned, as well as Simon's email and website, and a link to sign up for the next one. So until then, thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. So appreciate you sharing all your amazing wisdom with us today. Super interesting, really valuable. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone who attended. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.